Hello everyone and welcome to another Houdini tutorial. Today's going to be real fun. We're going to make a hot tub that bubbles and steams. A lot of the knowledge for this tutorial is bringing in things from some of my past tutorials, namely the hot teacup, the dandelion, and the donut. So if you haven't seen those yet, just a fair warning, I'm just kind of going to gloss over what I'm doing. I'm not going to rush through it. I'm just not going to give what I'm doing as much explanation as I would if you were being introduced to some of these concepts from the very beginning. So first things first, let's go ahead and create a project and save our file. All right, now that we have our scene prepared, let's go ahead and create our actual hot tub geometry. So to do that, let's drop down a geo. We'll call this one hot tub. Dive in and drop down a tube. I'm going to switch the primitive type to polygon and add a lot of columns so that our hot tub looks nice and smooth. Let's say 100. All right, I'm going to drop this down just 0.5 so that the top of our hot tub lines up with the default floor of Houdini. It'll just work better with our simulations if everything lines up correctly. So let's drop this down negative 0.5. And now let's add a little depth to our hot tub and do a poly extrude. Give it just a little girth here. And let's output the back. Looking pretty good so far. Let's try a poly bevel just to smooth out our edges. Okay, so we have our outer perimeter of our hot tub. I think now we can go ahead and create the seat that people can sit on while they enjoy the hot tub. So let's just make a quick copy of this poly bevel. I held Alt and then left click to make a copy and transform this. Let's put a template on this. Bring in our scale just a hair. And drop it down. And we want our seat to be pretty wide, so let's add another poly extrude. Actually, what I'm going to do is just make a quick copy of this poly extrude, wire this in instead, and then we can just increase the distance from here. Shrink this. Perfect. I think we can go ahead and add the bottom of our hot tub. We'll just do a simple circle. Change it to ZX and drop it down to the bottom. And let's merge all these together to see what it looks like. I think I'll raise the floor just a hair. It seems a little too deep. There. That looks good to me. Let's add a null here. We'll call this out hot tub. So I think now would be a good time to add a little grab bar to help people get in and out of our hot tub. We'll just drop down a line. Click the display, do the template here. And we'll put the grab bar off to the side. Increase the length. Quite a lot, let's say like 4. Drop it down so that the bottom is at the bottom of our hot tub. It's okay if it overlaps just a little bit. Let me check out this circle. So we can raise it up even a little more. Okay, let's add a little bit of depth to this by doing a poly wire. That's a lot more division. Smooth this out. Actually, let's say 15. And a lot of segments, maybe 50, because we're going to be bending this. The more segments we have, the better. I might even go up to 100. And we can reduce the radius of this. Okay, now we can go ahead and bend this by dropping down a bend. And we will set our capture direction on the y-axis. Not quite 90 degrees. Probably 80 degrees, I think looks good. And we could add another bend. I'm just going to make a copy and position it so it lines up with this one. And drop down a transform. Now we can go to our second bend and increase the change here a little bit. Let's make it so it's straight up and down. And merge these two together. Okay, we'll drop down a null for this guy. We'll call him out grab bar. Let's see what these look like together. Looking at this, let's bring in this grab bar just a hair. In hindsight, it's probably better to just drop down a second bend, but we are too invested now. Looks good. I think we can add the floor surrounding our hot tub now. So let's first create, well, let's do the grid. And I'm going to lower this just a little bit so we have a little bit of a wall surrounding our hot tub. And we want to cut a circle into our grid, and we'll do a Boolean for that. So we want to match the size of the outer perimeter of our hot tub. We'll drop down a quick circle. ZX, make it a polygon, add quite a lot of divisions, and let's increase the scale until it lines up with our hot tub. Let's do a top view. Right there. Go back to perspective, and let's extrude this out with a poly extrude. And let's make sure we output the back. So let's try a Boolean. And we have our floor. We'll drop down a quick null here. Call this out floor. And once again, let's merge this all together. Just so we can see the finished product. Looks awesome to me. I'm going to hurry and save just in case anything crashes. So now that we have all our geometry created, I think we can go ahead and fill up our hot tub with a liquid. So we're first going to create a container to fill up with particles, and then we're going to turn those particles into a fluid. So let's make a solid tube that fills up the right size as the hot tub. Let's drop down a tube. And we'll just do the same dimensions that we did with our hot tub. We only want it to be the inner. Let's do a polygon, 150, and we want end caps because it needs to be a solid piece of geometry. Now we'll drop this down, and increase the size, the height. Let's do, yeah, let's do a negative 0.8. You can fill yours more if you like, just so you know. If it bubbles, and it looks like it should bubble over the wall though, we're not making our wall or the floor static objects, just the inner container, so that might cause you some trouble. So try to make it a little bit lower than our outer wall that we made for our hot tub. Let's call this tube particles. So out particles. And let's drop down a node called points from volume. This will just fill up our geometry with a bunch of points, which will act as our liquid. Now, right here is a parameter called point separation. The lower our point separation, the better our fluid's going to look, but the longer it will take for our simulation to cache, to sim. So right now, let's just do 0.5, and we can always lower it more later. I think that should be pretty good for right now. This is a smaller sim, it's not to scale with real life, so I don't think it should give us too much trouble as it is at 0.05. So with our out particle selected, let's go up to our shelf tools, and let's do a flip fluid from object. Select object to convert into a flip fluid, our particles here, and press enter. And you'll see we got nothing because we need to go to our initial data, and in our input type, let's make it a particle field. And I'm noticing right here our SOP path, it just did it for the whole object. Let's go into our actual null here. There it is, out particles. Let's save real quick. And when we hit play, it should fall down, nothing to collide with, but at least it is working correctly. So we need to make a container for our particles to collide with. Let's hop up one level and go back into our hot tub. And using our tube here, we can actually create a container that matches the size similar to our particles. So let's make a copy of this tube actually. Do a blast from this top one so it's exposed. I'm just going to select it, our top, and hit delete, and it will make a blast for us already. Now let's poly extrude this. And output the back. And for our container, like I mentioned before about realistically our bubbling water might overflow just a little bit, I'm going to raise the walls so that that won't occur. I'm going to, with my select tool here, so I'm going to hold Shift and A and select all of our top primitives here. You might have to unclick it and then select the rest of the half, otherwise it cuts off right there. And so with these, it's going to group up all these primitives that I have selected. I'm going to hit Tab and Transform. And you'll see right here, group 302 to 451. That just means these primitives. And we'll just move this up a lot, just so our particles don't have a chance of accidentally spilling over. Now let's drop down a null. And we'll just call this out static. So now that we created our static object, let's actually add it into our auto dop network so that our particles will collide with it. To do that, with the null selected, let's go up to our collisions tab and hit static object. Select objects for static object right here and press enter. And if we go into our dop network, you'll see that they added it here. I'll press L to organize our nodes. Before I get too ahead of myself, there's one more thing we need to do with our flip object. In here, you'll notice that our particle separation is a different number than what our particles are in our points from volumes. So we need to link the two together. So when we influence this point separation, it's going to influence our auto.network network as well. So I'm going to hover over this, right click. Let's do copy parameter, go to our auto.network, network, and in our flip fluid object in our particle separation, let's paste relative reference. So now it's saying whatever we change here, also change here. Let's hit play and see what this looks like. Sitting in there nice and easy. Looks pretty good to me. To make things a little bit simpler, you'll see this bounding box around our particles. We can shrink that to increase the baking time of our simulation by highlighting over the flip solver, go to our handles, and let's shrink this box because right now it's calculating everything in this box. Our liquid's not moving or anything, so we can just go right in on it and make this really small. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. I think we can go ahead and create some bubbles for our hot tub. So let's hop up one level. And we can delete this node right here. We're not going to use it today, our fluid interior. So let's dive back into our hot tub. So to create our bubbles, we're going to emit particles, and then we're going to copy geometry onto those particles and use the velocity and the density of those the geometry being created to influence our water. And I know that sounds like a mouthful. Let me just show you by example and you'll completely get it. So let's drop down a circle real quick. We'll put on the ZX. And let's drop this down under our water. So now let's drop down a pop network. And we want particles to emit from this circle. We'll wire it into the first input, hit the display, and dive in. And so right now, we're going to get a bunch of particles scattered on our circle, but they're not doing anything and they keep adding up. So let's adjust a couple things. Let's go to our birth tab here. And instead of 5,000, I only want to emit maybe 20 particles. Remember that the constant activation is for seconds, whereas the impulse activation would be for frames. So right now we want 20 particles every second. If you want that more or less, you can adjust this number to adjust your bubbles. Now the life expectancy, we don't need it that high. We just need the particles to clear our water, and then they can go ahead and die off. So let's only do like 2 seconds. Go to our attributes, and we want to give this a little velocity. Right now it's not influenced by any velocity. They're just spawning and dying. So let's go to add or set initial velocity. And we don't want any variance because the bubbles really just fly straight up. Let's go to velocity 1, see what this looks like. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Let me just check real quick if the particles pass the water completely. Okay, I think that will work for what we want just fine. So we have our particles. Let's create the geometry of our bubbles. So we'll drop down a simple sphere. And let's make this a polygon. And with a frequency of maybe 20, well, let's do like with a frequency of 15, we'll say. So it doesn't need to be too smooth. We're not going to be using this actual geometry. We can lower the uniform depending on how big you want your bubbles. This is where you would do it. I just want maybe 0.1. Yeah, let's do 0.1. And let's make our geometry a little messy. We'll drop down a mountain node. It's all crazy here. Just a little bit of noise to it. That should be all right for what we want. So we can drop down a copy to points now. Required geometry and required points. And so now when we hit play, we're going to see all our geometry copied to our points. We're going to use this information to drive our bubbles. So now what we need to do is convert our geometry to VDB. And VDB is basically like we're turning our geometry into voxels. And voxels you can think of kind of like 3D pixels. A pixel is just a square, but when you collide all the pixels together, it makes an image, right? All these squares, all these different colored squares make an image. Well, think of this as a bunch of cubes forming together to create geometry, a 3D geometry. So let's drop down a VDB from polygons. And this is going to convert it into voxels. So right now you can see these really big 3D pixels or voxels. We want this to be a little more defined, so we can decrease the voxel size to something like 0.02. So it's a little more representative. I think I'm going to drop it down just a hair more. That looks good to me. And let's make sure to fill our interior as well. Okay, so I think we're good to get our bubbles into our auto-dot network. So let's drop down a quick null. And we'll call this out bubbles. And hop up, go to our auto-dot network. And now we want to drop down something called a volume source. And if we go over our inputs here, we have our particle velocity, our volume velocity, and our sourcing. We want to wire this into our volume velocity. And with this highlighted, let's go to our SOP path here and bring in our bubbles into our auto-dot network. Out bubbles. So we added in our bubbles. Let's initialize this into a collision object. And it's going to ask for a couple attributes from our bubbles. It says, okay, we need an attribute called collision. And we need an attribute called V, or velocity is what that stands for. So we don't have those attributes right now. Let's go to our OBJ and hop into our hot tub, and then we'll bring in these attributes from our VDB from polygons. We have our distance VDB, but right now it's an attribute called surface. So we can just change this to collision. Is it collision or collisions? It's collision. And then we need a V. Hop down here. We can add a surface attribute. Let's change this to a point position. V. And for our vector type, we want it to be a displacement, velocity, acceleration. It says, great, you have this information now. We have this, we're good to go. We're good to influence our particles with this. Let's just see what this looks like. All right, I just skipped forward a little bit. I think our particle separation might be a bit too low to wait for, but it's fine. And you can see from our visualizer, our points are a lighter blue. That means that they are being influenced right now. So as our bubbles pass through, they're influencing the water, the particles that they pass through, which gives us the bubbling effect that we want. Now, if you want bigger bubbles, more velocity, you would go to this volume source and add to this scale, and that will make the water just a little more chaotic. I think I'll just leave it here at default for now, but I might go back and change it later if I want bigger or smaller bubbles. But you can see that our particles are being influenced by these attributes that we added. So I think that's where we want our liquid to be. Everything's looking good. One thing that I might change real quick is our particle radius scale. And this is the distance that our particles separate from each other. I might just bump this up just a hair to 1.3 or 4. Just because eventually over time, if our particle radius scale is too small, our liquid starts to collapse on itself and it looks like almost like we have a small drain on the bottom of our pool and our liquid is leaking out. So to help fight that, you increase this particle radius scale. Since I'm happy with how my simulation looks, I think I'll lower the particle separation to something more like 0.01. It'll take a long time, but it'll look really nice. So we'll hop up and we'll go to this geometry node right here, and it's going to bring in the information from our auto.network network right here. These are all our particles. This is what's being displayed whenever we are influencing here. So let's go ahead and cache these particles. It might take a while depending on how low your particle separation is. We'll just recall this particles and saved file. So it's looking like our liquid is still shrinking. Let's bump up the particle radius just a hair more and try this again. I think I'll bump this up just a little more. Let's say something more like 1.9 we'll try. We'll go ahead and cache this out. All right, we finished caching. Let's see how this looks. You know, it still goes down a little bit. I think in hindsight, I probably should just do the particle separation at 2, but it's not that noticeable, especially when our liquid will be bubbling. I think I'm okay with this, so we can go ahead and go to the next step here. Let's compress this, and you can skip this step if you'd like. It'll just make the cleaning up the particle fluid surface a little quicker, and it doesn't take that long to cache, so I like to just save this as compressed and cache this out. All right, we got our cache going. Let's check it out. Load from disk. Looks good. Now we can check out our particle fluid surface, and this is what turns our particles into an actual liquid. Looks pretty good to me. We can do a couple things now to our particle fluid surface. In the filtering tab, we can dilate, smooth, erode, and do a final smooth. I like to just put on a smooth and a final smooth. And now let's cache this surface. I'm going to, let's just call this, we'll just call it surface. And save to disk. All right, we got that all cached up. Let's load from disk and see what this looks like. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. I think we are good as far as our liquids go. Let's check it out with the geometry that we created. Awesome. I think we are okay to start making some sort of steam, and this should be, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. I kind of covered this more on my hot teacup tutorial. So let's just make a quick emitter. We'll drop down a geometry and we'll call this steam emitter. Dive in, put down a circle. It's about the same size already. I'm just going to shrink it down because when it converts into a density, it kind of gets a little bit bigger. We'll put that on the surface level of our liquid. Right here. Okay, and we'll just go to the shelf tools up here. Let's find our pyro effects and go to wispy smoke. Select our emitter, press enter. And I'm going to turn off our fluid right now in our geometry. Let's check out our pyro sim real quick. So already I'm seeing that it's rising way too much than steam normally would in a hot tub. I'm going to crank this cooling rate up to like 0.99 because we want it to cool off pretty soon afterwards. Looks good. Let's go to our shape. Let's up the disturbance just a little bit. Let's make this a 5. We don't want shredding, we don't want sharpening, maybe just a little bit of turbulence because of all the bubbles, maybe like a 0.1. Check it out. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Let's let's lower the division size, let's say 0.05. And I think we're good as far as Steam goes. So we can go ahead and cache this out. So let's go ahead and cache this out. I'm just going to hit the display flag on our .io. And for our save to disk, we'll just save this as Steam. All right, that didn't take too long. Let's load from disk and check it out. Looks good. I think we're good to set this up for a render. So let's get our geometry in here and our fluid. And since I'm going to split up the different materials on all these different objects, let's give each of these their own geometry. So for our first one, we'll just call this hot tub render. Dive inside, drop down an object merge, find our hot tub right here. And I'm going to uncheck the display flag here so I know what I've already covered. Let's just make a copy of that real quick. We'll just call this one guardrail. Dive in, change this to our grab bar. Let's make this one our floor. And is that everything? Okay, I think we got everything. Let's add a light. Today, I'm feeling a distant light. Let's make our hot tub outdoors. And we'll rotate it just a little bit. Let's cast a nice shadow. All right, that looks good. Let's start applying our shaders. So first, let's make a camera. Control left click so it's in our current viewport here. Let's save it and check this out in the render view. Okay, it's looking all right. Let's make some materials here. We already have our basic liquid assigned to our water. Let's do one for the hot tub itself. Let's just do like a white porcelain. We'll hop up here, go to our hot tub render, and go material, white porcelain. Okay, let's we'll just assign aluminum to our grab bar. And we'll make our floor, you know, basic concrete. We'll just make our own shader in this case. Call this concrete. Just drag and drop that one. Make it a little bit darker. Not reflective. We want it rougher. Not very reflective, like a 0.5, I'm thinking. I think I'll add a little bit of color to our hot tub. Now we already have a material for our wispy smoke. Drag and drop that and assign that. And here we can adjust the density of our steam. And I think I don't really like that gray. It looks pretty boring. Let's make it like a blue. Make it look like it's at more of a resort. And that's starting to look pretty good to me. Let's adjust the angle of this sun real quick. -20. I really like that sunsetty shadow we have going on. Pop Pop out of this real quick and save it. Looking at our render view, I think I might just raise the water level a bit. It looks too shallow to me. So we'll go to our hot tub fluid. We can just transform it right here. Let's just crank it up a hair. Let's see what that looks like. Better. Okay guys, I think we're ready to go ahead and get this rendered up. We'll go to our Out tab, Rendering. We'll do a physically based rendering. Up the pixel samples, something like 9x9 or 10x10 is my usual go-to. And there's a lot of different parameters here that you can increase, such as the refraction and the reflection quality. Another good one would be the subsurface scattering. But if you're not in a hurry, you can just go ahead and up these pixel samples for now. And that should be everything. I appreciate you guys following me and watching my tutorials. It really gives me the motivation to keep making more of these. If you have any questions about what I did here, or suggestions on ways that I could improve this process, or maybe you have a tutorial that you'd like to see next, please let me know. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Bye!